The darkness falls early, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that seeps through every crack and crevice. Outside, the wind howls like a hungry wolf, driving needles of sleet against the humble dwelling. Inside, a family huddles around a smoky fire that struggles against the darkness, their breath visible in the frigid air. This is not a scene from some apocalyptic future. This was the reality for millions of medieval peasants across Europe for half the year, every year for centuries. When temperatures plummeted and daylight dwindled to precious few hours, survival itself became the primary occupation of these resilient people. Modern humans, with our central heating, insulated homes, and 24-hour supermarkets, can scarcely imagine facing winter with nothing but what our hands could make and our limited resources could provide. Yet medieval peasants not only survived, but developed ingenious systems to endure conditions that would break many of us today. Their story is not one of mere endurance, but of remarkable human adaptability and communal wisdom passed down through generations. Tonight, we journey back to a time when winter wasn't just an inconvenience, but an existential threat. When the difference between life and death might be as simple as how well you'd banked your fire, or how tightly you'd thatched your roof. How did medieval peasants, with their limited technology and resources, manage to survive the brutal winter nights that claimed so many lives? The answers reveal not just their struggle, but their extraordinary ingenuity. Imagine building your home with nothing but the materials you could gather from the surrounding landscape, and only the simplest of tools. No power drills, no prefabricated materials, no hardware stores. This was the reality for medieval peasants. Yet the homes they created were remarkable adaptations to their harsh environment. Archaeological excavations across Europe have revealed that peasant houses varied significantly by region, climate, and available materials. But they shared common principles of practical design born from necessity. In England, the typical peasant home was the crock house, a timber-frame structure where curved wooden beams, crocks, form an A-frame from ground to roof peak. Between these sturdy frames, walls were created using a technique called wattle and daub, a lattice of wooden strips, wattle, covered with a mixture of clay, straw, manure, and sometimes animal hair or blood dog. This wasn't primitive construction, it was ingenious environmental engineering. Research from the Weald and Downman Living Museum in Sussex has demonstrated that these walls provided surprising insulation. The organic materials in dog created millions of tiny air pockets that trapped heat, functioning similarly to modern insulation. Experimental archaeology has shown that a well-maintained wattle and daub wall could achieve an R-value insulation measurement roughly equivalent to a basic insulated wall today. In colder regions like Scandinavia and parts of Eastern Europe, peasants developed different solutions. Archaeological remains from 10th century settlements in Denmark show houses partially dug into the ground, semi-subterranean dwellings that took advantage of the Earth's natural insulation. The ground maintains a more stable temperature than air, typically staying around 10 degrees Celsius, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, below the frost line, regardless of surface conditions. By building partially underground, these peasants effectively created a natural thermal barrier against the -20 degrees Celsius, -4 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures that could ravage northern Europe in winter. But perhaps most surprising to modern sensibilities was the deliberate incorporation of animal waste into construction. Far from being merely a desperate use of available materials, this represented sophisticated knowledge of thermal properties. Manure contains cellulose fibers that when dried create excellent insulation. Modern scientific analysis of preserved daub samples from a 13th century English peasant house found that manure-enhanced walls had approximately 20% better thermal retention than those without. The roof, typically thatched with reed, straw, or heather, depending on local resources, provided another crucial layer of insulation. A properly laid thatch could be up to 30 centimeters, 12 inches thick, creating a remarkably effective barrier against both cold and moisture. Experimental reconstructions by historians at the Butser ancient farm in Hampshire have demonstrated that a well-maintained thatch roof can last 40 to 50 years and provide insulation comparable to modern standards. The dense layering of organic material created millions of tiny air pockets, nature's own double glazing. Perhaps most telling about the effectiveness of these medieval solutions is a 2018 thermal imaging study conducted on reconstructed medieval houses at the Weald and Douma Museum. The study found that a properly maintained medieval peasant house with a small fire burning could maintain interior temperatures 15 to 20 degrees Celsius, 27 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than the outside during winter conditions. This difference could literally be life-saving during the coldest nights. The floors of these homes, contrary to popular depictions of bare earth, were often carefully engineered for warmth. Archaeological evidence from sites across England and France shows that many peasant homes had raised wooden platforms for sleeping, keeping inhabitants off the cold ground. In other regions, floors were layered with insulating materials, rushes, straw, and dried herbs that not only provided warmth, but also pleasant aromas to combat the inevitable oily odors of close winter living. Windows, those necessary vulnerabilities in any structure, were minimal in peasant homes. Most had just small openings, covered with oiled parchment, wooden shutters, or sometimes thin slices of horn, which allowed some light while minimizing heat loss. The limited archaeological evidence we have suggests that these coverings reduced heat loss by as much as 30% compared to an open aperture. The entire structure was oriented with careful attention to the environment. Manor records from the Abbey of Cluny in France note that peasant houses were typically built with doors facing away from prevailing winter winds and in position to maximize exposure to winter sunlight. This passive solar design principle, rediscovered by modern green architects, was intuitive knowledge from medieval builders who understood that survival depended on such details. What emerges from the archaeological and historical record is not a picture of primitive shelters, but rather of sophisticated environmental adaptations created through generations of accumulated knowledge. These weren't just houses, they were survival machines, carefully engineered from available materials to create microclimates that could sustain life through the darkest, coldest months of the year. As darkness falls and temperatures plummet, a medieval peasant family gathers around the central feature of their home, the hearth. This isn't merely a place for cooking, it's the beating heart of winter survival, the difference between life and death on the coldest nights. But the medieval hearth was far more sophisticated than the simple fire pit many imagine. Archaeological excavations across Europe reveal that, by the 11th century, most peasant homes featured a central hearth, an open fire pit in the middle of the main room, with smoke escaping through a hole in the roof. This central positioning wasn't just traditional, it was thermodynamically optimal. Heat radiates equally in all directions, warming the entire space rather than being lost to an exterior wall. Experimental reconstructions at historical sites like West Stowe Anglo-Saxon village have demonstrated that a central hearth could raise the ambient temperature of a typical peasant home by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 18 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, above outside temperatures within just an hour of lighting. The fuel used in these hearths reveals another dimension of medieval ingenuity. While modern people might assume wood was the primary fuel, historical records tell a different story. Manor court rules from 13th century England document strict regulations on wood gathering, indicating its value and relative scarcity. Instead, peasants relied on a diverse fuel portfolio that changed with seasons and availability. Peat, compressed plant matter cut from bogs, was a crucial winter fuel across northern Europe. Archaeological samples from medieval middens waste heaps in Ireland and Scotland show that peat was cut in standard blocks, dried during summer, and stored for winter use. Scientific analysis reveals that a kilogram of dried peat contains approximately 15 to 21 megajoules of energy, less than coal, but with the advantage of burning slowly and steadily. Manor records from the Abbey of Fountains in Yorkshire show that a typical peasant household would stockpile between 1,000 to 1,500 kilograms of dried peat for winter water, representing roughly 25,000 metajoules of potential heat, enough to maintain survivable temperatures through the coldest months. When peat wasn't available, peasants turned to other ingenious fuel sources. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe shows the burning of dried dung, particularly from cattle, compressed straw, gorse, heather, and even seaweed in coastal areas. These weren't inferior desperation fuels, but carefully selected alternatives with specific burning properties. Cattle dung, for instance, burns at lower temperatures but for longer periods than wood, making it ideal for overnight heating. A study of preserved dung sample from a 12th century midden in Denmark showed that properly dried cattle dung could burn for up to 8 hours at a steady temperature, perfect for maintaining heat through the long winter nights. The management of the hearth fire was an art form developed over generations. Manor household accounts and instructional texts like the 13th century Seneschorcy, a manual for estate management, described techniques for banking fires, covering burning embers with ashes to slow combustion without extinguishing it. This practice allowed a fire to smolder through the night with minimal fuel consumption, ready to be revived in the morning. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that a properly banked fire could maintain temperatures above freezing in a small dwelling for 8 to 10 hours with no additional fuel, a critical efficiency when resources were scarce. Smoke management was another sophisticated aspect of hearth technology. While the popular image of medieval homes includes smoke-filled interiors, the reality was more nuanced. By the later medieval period, many peasant homes included smoke bays or rudimentary chimneys. Archaeological evidence from sites in England and France shows that some homes had wattle hurdles, woven screens, placed above the fire at ceiling height, which would catch soot while allowing heat to circulate. The soot-covered hurdles would eventually be removed and used as fertilizer in gardens, a perfect example of medieval circular economy thinking. Even in homes without chimneys, smoke management was carefully considered. The smoke hole in the roof was often equipped with an adjustable cover operated by a pull, allowing inhabitants to regulate both smoke release and heat retention. Experimental reconstructions have shown that skilled management of this simple system could reduce smoke in the living area by up to 70% while minimizing heat loss. The hearth also served as the center of food preparation during winter, adding another dimension to its efficiency. Cooking pots suspended over the fire not only prepared meals, but added crucial humidity to the otherwise dry heated air. This moisture helped prevent respiratory problems that come with breathing dry air and reduce the fire risk from overly desiccated thatch and timber. Perhaps most fascinating is the evidence for heat storage systems. Archaeological findings from several northern European sites show stones arranged around hearths. These weren't random, but purposeful thermal batteries. Stones would absorb heat during peak fire times and continue radiating it for hours after the flames died down. Similarly, clay benches built near hearths in some regions serve both as seating and heat storage, warming slowly but releasing heat steadily throughout the night. The entire structure was oriented with careful attention to the environment. Manor records from the Abbey of Cluny in France note that peasant houses were typically built with doors facing away from prevailing winter winds and positioned to maximize exposure to winter sunlight. This passive solar design principle, rediscovered by modern green architects, was intuitive knowledge from medieval builders who understood that survival depended on such details. What emerges from the archaeological and historical record is not a picture of primitive shelters, but rather of sophisticated environmental adaptations created through generations of accumulated knowledge. These weren't just houses, they were survival machines, carefully engineered from available materials to create microclimates that could sustain life through the darkest, coldest months of the year. As darkness falls and temperatures plummet, a medieval peasant family gathers around the central feature of their home, the hearth. This isn't merely a place for cooking, it's the beating heart of winter survival, the difference between life and death on the coldest nights. But the medieval hearth was far more sophisticated than the simple fire pit many imagine. Archaeological excavations across Europe reveal that by the 11th century, most peasant homes featured a central hearth, an open fire pit in the middle of the main room, with smoke escaping through a hole in the roof. This central positioning wasn't just traditional, it was thermodynamically optimal. Heat radiates equally in all directions, warming the entire space rather than being lost to an exterior wall. Experimental reconstructions of historical sites like West Stowe Anglo-Saxon village have demonstrated that a central hearth could raise the ambient temperature of a typical peasant home by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, 18 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, above outside temperatures within just an hour of lighting. The fuel used in these hearths reveals another dimension of medieval ingenuity. While modern people might assume wood was the primary fuel, historical records tell a different story. Manor court rolls from 13th century England documents strict regulations on wood gathering, indicating its value and relative scarcity. Instead, peasants relied on a diverse fuel portfolio that changed with seasons and availability. Peat, compressed plant matter cut from bogs, was a crucial winter fuel across northern Europe. Archaeological samples from medieval middens waste heaps in Ireland and Scotland show that peat was cut in standard blocks, dried during summer and stored for winter use. Scientific analysis reveals that a kilogram of dried peat contains approximately 15 to 21 megajoules of energy, less than coal, but with the advantage of burning slowly and steadily. Manor records from the Abbey of Fountains in Yorkshire show that a typical peasant household would stockpile between 1,000 to 1,500 kilograms of dried peat for winter, representing roughly 25,000 megajoules of potential heat, enough to maintain survivable temperatures through the coldest months. When peat wasn't available, peasants turned to other ingenious fuel sources. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe shows the burning of dry dung, particularly from cattle, compressed straw, gorse, heather, and even seaweed in coastal areas. These weren't inferior desperation fuels, but carefully selected alternatives with specific burning properties. Cattle dung, for instance, burns at lower temperatures but for longer periods than wood, making it ideal for overnight heating. A study of preserved dung samples from a 12th century midden in Denmark showed that properly dried cattle dung could burn for up to 8 hours at a steady temperature, perfect for maintaining heat through the long winter nights. The management of the hearth fire was an art form developed over generations. Manor household accounts and instructional texts, like the 13th century Senesaw C, a manual for estate management, described techniques for banking fires, covering burning embers with ashes to slow combustion without extinguishing it. This practice allowed a fire to smolder through the night with minimal fuel consumption, ready to be revived in the morning. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that a properly banked fire could maintain temperatures above freezing in a small dwelling for 8 to 10 hours with no additional fuel. A critical efficiency when resources were scarce. Smoke management was another sophisticated aspect of hearth technology. While the popular image of medieval homes includes smoke-filled interiors, the reality was more nuanced. By the later medieval period, many peasant homes included smoke bays or rudimentary chimneys. Archaeological evidence from sites in England and France shows that some homes had wattle hurdles, woven screens, placed above the fire at ceiling height, which would catch soot while allowing heat to circulate. The soot-covered hurdles would eventually be removed and used as fertilizer in gardens, a perfect example of medieval circular economy thinking. Even in homes without chimneys, smoke management was carefully considered. The smoke hole in the roof was often equipped with an adjustable cover operated by a pull, allowing inhabitants to regulate both smoke release and heat retention. Experimental reconstructions have shown that skilled management of this simple system could reduce smoke in the living area by up to 70% while minimizing heat loss. The hearth also served as the center of food preparation during winter, adding another dimension to its efficiency. Cooking pots suspended over the fire not only prepared meals, but added crucial humidity to the otherwise dry heated air. This moisture helped prevent respiratory problems that come with breathing dry air and reduced the fire risk from overly desiccated thatch and timber. Perhaps most fascinating is the evidence for heat storage systems. Archaeological findings from several Northern European sites show stones arranged around hearths. These were random but purposeful thermal batteries. Stones would absorb heat during peak fire times and continue radiating it for hours after the flames died down. Similarly, clay benches built near hearths in some regions served both as seating and heat storage, warming slowly but releasing heat steadily throughout the night. The medieval hearth wasn't just a fire. It was a sophisticated environmental control system developed through centuries of trial and error, representing the accumulated wisdom of generations facing the existential threat of winter cold. In many ways, it was the medieval equivalent of our modern evac systems, but operated with intimate knowledge rather than automated controls. The first snowfall brings more than just cold. It heralds the beginning of a critical test for medieval peasants. Summer's abundance is now a distant memory, and the specter of hunger looms alongside that of freezing. Yet medieval communities had developed remarkably sophisticated food preservation and storage systems that not only prevented starvation, but maintained nutritional diversity through the barren months. When excavating a medieval peasant home in Lincolnshire in 1992, archaeologists discovered something unexpected beneath the packed earth floor. A series of clay-lined pits approximately 1 meter deep. Similar features have since been found across numerous European sites, revealing one of the peasants' most valuable winter resources, the underground storage pit. These subterranean ladders maintain temperatures between 4 to 10 degrees Celsius, 39 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, even when surface temperatures plunge below freezing, creating natural refrigeration that slowed food spoilage. Manure records from the Abbey of Bury, St. Edmunds detail how these pits were prepared lined with straw, filled with produce, covered with more straw, and sealed with clay caps. This created a modified atmosphere low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide, essentially the same principle used in modern controlled atmosphere storage for apples and root vegetables. Scientific analysis of preserved plant remains from these pits shows they were primarily used for storing apples, pears, turnips, carrots, and other root vegetables which could remain edible for 4 to 6 months under these conditions. For grains, the crucial caloric foundation of the medieval diet, different solutions were developed. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe shows dedicated granaries with raised floors to prevent moisture and rodent access. But more intriguing are the grain storage techniques used within peasant homes. Excavations have revealed large ceramic storage jars, often partially buried in house floors to maintain stable temperatures. In some regions, grain was stored in tightly woven baskets sealed with clay, creating airtight containers that prevented both moisture damage and insect infestation. The effectiveness of these storage methods is documented in manure accounts, which record grain reserves lasting from harvest until the following summer. A particularly detailed account from the manor of Cuxham in Oxfordshire shows that in 1316-17, during the Great Famine, peasant households still maintained grain stores sufficient for 4 to 5 months, demonstrating the resilience of these preservation systems even in crisis years. Perhaps the most sophisticated preservation techniques involve protein sources, crucial for winter nutrition but naturally prone to rapid spoilage. Smoking, a preservation method still used today, was refined to an art form. Archaeological excavations have found specialized smoking chambers attached to some peasant dwellings, while manor records describe communal smoking facilities in many villages. The process wasn't crude or simplistic. Different woods were selected for specific flavors and preservation properties. Oak provided long-lasting heat and strong preservative compounds, while fruit woods imparted milder flavors to delicate meats like poultry. Scientific analysis of preserved food residues from medieval sites reveals that smoking wasn't just about flavor. It effectively deposited phenolic compounds that inhibited bacterial growth. Modern laboratory testing of traditionally smoked meats shows that properly smoked products have significantly reduced levels of spoilage bacteria and can remain safe to eat for months without refrigeration. Salt preservation represented another sophisticated technology, though one often controlled by manorial authorities due to salt's value. Manure records from coastal regions document salt rights, specific allocations allowing peasants to produce or purchase set amounts of salt for winter preservation. Archaeological evidence from inland areas shows salt being transported over remarkable distances, underscoring its critical importance. The 13th century household records from Bolia Abbey note that a typical peasant family required approximately 2 to 3 kilograms of salt annually, primarily for food preservation. The preservation process itself was carefully calibrated. Meat wasn't simply packed in salt but processed through specific brining and drying sequences. Archaeological evidence from waste pits shows butchery patterns optimized for preservation. Meat cut into smaller portions with maximized surface area for salt penetration. Historical records from the 13th century describe meat preserved this way, remaining edible for up to 6 months, crucial for stretching protein sources through winter. Fermentation provided another preservation pathway, converting perishable foods into stable forms, while often enhancing their nutritional value. Archaeological evidence shows widespread use of ceramic fermentation crocks and wooden barrels. Analysis of residues from these vessels reveals a diverse fermentation culture. Cabbage becoming sauerkraut, milk transformed into cheese and yogurt, fruits preserved as alcoholic beverages. These weren't merely preservation methods, but nutritional strategies. Fermentation increases bioavailability of certain nutrients and produces beneficial compounds absent in raw foods. The medieval diet was further extended through drying techniques. Excavations have revealed specialized drying racks in many peasant homes, positioned above hearths to take advantage of rising heat. Apples, pears, plums, and berries were sliced and dried, creating compact, stable food sources rich in calories and nutrients. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that properly dried fruits can retain up to 70% of their vitamin content for several months, providing crucial micronutrients during winter when fresh produce was unavailable. Perhaps most impressive was the integrated nature of these preservation systems. They weren't isolated techniques, but part of a comprehensive approach to food security. Manure records show careful planning of preservation activities timed to seasonal availability. The 13th century agricultural calendar from Ramsey Abbey details the preservation schedule, starting with early summer berries and continuing through late autumn nuts and root vegetables, creating a diversified winter food portfolio that provided both caloric sufficiency and nutritional balance. This sophisticated approach to food preservation wasn't merely about survival. It represented generations of accumulated knowledge about nutrition, microbiology, and food chemistry, developed through careful observation and passed down through practical instruction. The medieval peasants' winter larder wasn't just a food storage system. It was an advanced technology for nutritional time shifting, allowing summer's abundance to sustain life through winter scarcity. The wooden trencher steams in the dim firelight as a thick potage is ladled from the bubbling cauldron. This isn't just any meal, it's a carefully calibrated survival strategy, the culmination of generations of nutritional wisdom designed to sustain bodies through the brutal demands of winter. The medieval winter diet, far from being mere subsistence, represented a sophisticated understanding of human nutritional needs under extreme conditions. Manorial records from across Europe document a distinct shift in eating patterns as winter approached. The household roll of Eleanor de Montfort from 1265 shows that daily bread consumption increased from approximately 450 grams per person in summer to nearly 700 grams in winter months, a recognition of the increased caloric demands of cold weather. Modern nutritional science confirms the wisdom of this approach. Research indicates that humans in cold environments without modern heating may require up to 30% more calories to maintain body temperature and energy levels. Archaeological analysis of preserved human remains from medieval cemeteries provides direct evidence of this dietary shift. Isotope analysis of bones from the 12th century cemetery at Warren Percy in Yorkshire shows seasonal variations in carbon and nitrogen ratios, indicating systematic dietary changes between summer and winter. These changes reflect not just different food availability, but deliberate nutritional strategies for cold weather survival. The cornerstone of the winter diet was grain, primarily rye and barley in northern Europe, wheat in more favorable southern regions. These weren't simply consumed as bread, but transformed into a diverse range of high-calorie foods. Archaeological evidence from cooking vessels shows residues of porridges, gruels, and pottages, thick hearty mixtures that maximize caloric density. Experimental reconstructions based on medieval recipes demonstrate that a typical barley pottage with dried peas and preserved meat could provide approximately 600 to 800 calories per serving, an efficient fuel for cold weather. What made these grain-based dishes particularly effective as winter fare was their thermal properties. Manor household accounts frequently mention the importance of serving food hot during winter months. Modern research confirms the wisdom of this practice. A study published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition found that consuming hot foods raises core body temperature more effectively than the same nutrients consumed cold, providing an immediate warming effect beyond the caloric content. Fats played a crucial role in the winter diet, with archaeological evidence showing a marked increase in fat consumption during colder months. Excavations of medieval kitchen middens show higher concentrations of animal bone marrow extraction marks in winter-associated layers, indicating intensive processing to access these calorie-dense nutrients. Manor accounts record the careful preservation of fats from autumn slaughtering, lard from pigs, tallow from sheep and cattle, stored in sealed crocks for winter use. This emphasis on fat wasn't merely about calories, but represented an intuitive understanding of its thermal properties. Calories. Modern research confirms that dietary fat consumption increases thermogenesis, heat production, more than equivalent calories from carbohydrates or proteins. A 2017 study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that high-fat meals increase thermogenesis by approximately 14% compared to low-fat alternatives, a difference that could be life-saving in poorly heated medieval environments. Protein sources changed dramatically with the seasons. Summer's fresh meat gave way to preserved varieties, smoked, salted, and dried. Archaeological evidence from waste deposits shows different butchery patterns between seasons. Summer bones show cuts optimized for immediate consumption, while autumn processing focused on preservation-friendly portions. The preserved meats weren't just emergency rations, but were incorporated into cooking methods that maximized their nutritional value. One such method was the ubiquitous potage, a thick soup or stew that would simmer for hours, sometimes days, over the hearth fire. Food historian Peter Breer's analysis of medieval cooking techniques has demonstrated that this slow cooking method extracted maximum nutrition from limited ingredients. Bones, gristle, and tough meat cuts would release gelatin and collagen during extended cooking. Proteins that not only provided nutrition, but created satisfying warming textures that increased satiety. Modern nutritional analysis confirms that these slow-cook preparations increased the bioavailability of nutrients compared to quicker cooking methods. Dairy products, particularly cheese, provided crucial winter protein. Manor records document autumn cheese making as a critical preparation for winter. The account rolls from Bolton Priory in Yorkshire show that approximately 30% of summer milk production was transformed into hard cheeses specifically for winter consumption. Preservation. Archaeological evidence from storage areas shows specialized cheese storage structures designed to maintain appropriate humidity and temperature for long-term preservation. What's particularly notable about medieval winter nutrition was the sophisticated understanding of micronutrients long before vitamins were scientifically identified. Preserved fruits, carefully dried during summer abundance, provided essential vitamins. Fermented vegetables, particularly cabbage as sauerkraut, delivered vitamin C throughout winter, preventing scurvy centuries before the vitamin was identified. Archaeological evidence shows widespread consumption of these preserved foods across all social classes, indicating their recognized importance. Herbs played a dual role in the winter diet, both as flavor enhancers and as medicine. Manor garden records document dedicated herb cultivation, with many varieties harvested and dried specifically for winter use. Modern phytochemical analysis has confirmed the medicinal properties of many commonly used medieval herbs. Thyme and sage contain powerful antimicrobial compounds. Rosemary improves circulation. Mint aids digestion. These weren't simply flavoring agents, but integrated pharmacopoeia that supported winter health. The timing of meals also shifted with the seasons. Manor household accounts show that winter meals were concentrated during daylight hours, with the largest meal typically consumed at midday when ambient temperatures were highest. This practice maximized the thermogenic effect of digestion, the body's heat production, while processing food during the coldest part of the night. Modern chronobiology research confirms that this approach optimizes metabolic efficiency in cold environments. Beverages, too, were calibrated for winter conditions. Archaeological evidence shows increased production of higher alcohol ales in autumn, specifically for winter consumption. The additional calories and vasodilatory effects of moderate alcohol provided warmth, while brewing process itself made water safe to drink. Herbal infusions, documented in numerous medieval texts, provided both hydration and medicinal benefits during winter months. What emerges from both archaeological and documentary evidence is not a picture of desperate subsistence, but rather a sophisticated nutritional strategy developed through generations of observation and experience. The medieval winter diet wasn't simply about avoiding starvation. It was a carefully calibrated system for maintaining health, energy, and warmth through the most challenging season, representing an intuitive understanding of nutritional principles that science would only formally identify centuries later. As the last embers of the hearth fire glowed dimly in the darkness, the most dangerous hours of winter begin. Modern humans, accustomed to maintaining consistent temperatures around the clock, can scarcely imagine the challenge that nighttime presented to medieval peasants. Yet archaeological and historical evidence reveals that medieval communities developed remarkably effective strategies for the most vulnerable hours of winter, the long cold night. Excavations of peasant dwellings across Europe have uncovered the physical evidence of sleeping arrangements carefully engineered for cold weather survival. Contrary to popular depictions of peasants sleeping on dirt floors, archaeological findings from sites in England, France, and Germany reveal raised wooden sleeping platforms in many homes. These elevations, typically 30 to 40 centimeters above floor level, created crucial separation from the cold ground. Modern thermal studies have demonstrated that even this modest elevation can increase sleeping surface temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to ground level, a difference that could determine survival on the coldest nights. The beds themselves were more sophisticated than commonly portrayed. While straw mattresses were indeed common, they weren't simply loose piles of straw, but carefully constructed sleep systems. Manor account record from the Abbey of Glastonbury detail the autumn mattress-making activities, describing how fresh straw was selected, dried and bound into tight mattresses that provided both insulation and support. Experimental archaeology conducted at the Weald and Downham Museum has demonstrated that these mattresses, when properly constructed, provided insulation equivalent to approximately 2.5 in modern terms, comparable to a basic modern mattress. More revealing are the bedding textiles documented in peasant inventories and archaeological finds. Contrary to assumptions about medieval poverty, even modest households maintained significant investments in bedding. Probate inventories from 14th century English villages show that bedding often represented 15 to 20% of a peasant household's total material wealth, underscoring its critical importance. The inventory of John Malderson, a 14th century peasant from the village of Walsham Mawillows, lists 2 blankets, 1 coverlet, 2 sheets, and 1 bolster, a substantial bedding assembly even by modern standards. The materials used in these textiles were specifically selected for thermal properties. Archaeological textile fragments from sites across northern Europe show that winter bedding commonly used wool and hemp, often in multiple layers. Modern thermal testing of recreated medieval blankets has demonstrated that a traditional wool blanket, approximately 5 millimeters thick, provides insulation equivalent to a modern synthetic blanket with superior moisture management properties, crucial in environments where condensation could be as dangerous as cold itself. Perhaps most ingenious were the bed curtains that transformed sleeping areas into microenvironments. While often associated with wealthy households, archaeological evidence shows that even modest homes used simple curtain arrangements around sleeping areas. These were decorative elements, but functional thermal enclosures that trapped body heat in a smaller air volume. Experimental reconstructions have demonstrated that enclosed bed curtains could raise the sleeping microclimate temperature by 8 to 10 degrees Celsius, 14.4 to 18 degrees Fahrenheit, above ambient room temperature through body heat alone, transforming an uncomfortably cold room into a survivable sleeping environment. The strategic use of hot water bottles and bed warmers is well documented in medieval sources. Archaeological findings include ceramic and metal containers specifically designed for this purpose. Manor household accounts record the allocation of heated stones or bricks wrapped in cloth for bed warming. Experimental testing has shown that a single heated stone of approximately 2 kilograms, properly wrapped, could release heat for 3 to 4 hours, taking the dangerous edge off the coldest part of the night when fires burned lowest. Sleeping arrangements themselves reflected thermal strategies. Manor court records documenting household compositions show that medieval families typically slept in close proximity during winter months, not merely due to limited space, but as a deliberate heat-sharing strategy. Anthropological studies of traditional societies in cold climates indicate that shared body heat in sleeping arrangements can raise ambient temperature in the immediate sleeping area by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, 5.4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to sleeping alone, a significant margin when surviving near freezing temperatures. The timing and structure of sleep itself adapted to winter conditions. While modern humans typically follow a consolidated sleep pattern of 7 to 8 hours, historical evidence suggests that medieval winter sleep often followed a bimodal pattern, 2 sleep periods separated by a period of wakefulness. This first sleep and second sleep pattern, documented in numerous medieval sources, allowed for fire tending during the night and adjustment of bedding and warm sources. Medical texts from the period show sophisticated understanding of the relationship between sleep and cold survival. The 13th century medical compendium Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum provides specific guidance on winter sleeping positions, recommending curl positions that minimize exposed surface area and conserve body heat. Modern thermographic studies confirm that a curled sleeping position can reduce heat loss by up to 31% compared to an extended position. Another example of medieval practical wisdom validated by modern science. Particularly vulnerable populations received special sleeping accommodations. Archaeological evidence from several sites shows that the elderly and very young, those most vulnerable to hypothermia, were typically positioned in the warmest sleeping locations, usually closest to the hearth or in the most insulated corners of the dwelling. Manor records documenting household arrangements confirm this pattern across different regions, indicating a widespread understanding of differential cold vulnerability. Children's sleeping arrangements reveal particular ingenuity. Archaeological evidence from several northern European sites shows small, box-like wooden structures that serve as children's beds, often positioned elevated from the floor and near adults' sleeping areas. These compact spaces maximize the heating efficiency of small bodies, while allowing proximity to adult warmth sources. Similar designs are still used in traditional societies in extremely cold environments like the Arctic, where the principle of minimizing the heated air volume around small bodies remains crucial to survival. Even the orientation of beds within houses followed thermologic. Archaeological floor plans from excavated medieval houses show that beds were typically positioned away from exterior walls and, where possible, against interior walls that would retain hearth heat longer. This practice minimized exposure to the coldest surfaces in the home, a principle still recommended in modern cold weather survival guidelines. What emerges from the historical and archaeological record is not a picture of primitive discomfort, but rather a sophisticated system of sleep microclimate management developed through generations of winter survival experience. Medieval peasants didn't simply endure cold nights. They engineered multi-layered solutions that created survivable microclimates during the most vulnerable hours, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of thermal principles that modern science has only formally quantified in recent decades. The bitter wind howls outside the humble dwelling, finding every crack and crevice. Inside, a peasant woman reaches for her winter clothing. Clothing, not the crude shapeless garments often depicted in modern imagination, but a carefully engineered system of layers designed through generations of cold weather experience. Medieval winter clothing wasn't merely covering, it was survival technology as sophisticated in its way as modern performance wear. Archaeological textile finds from medieval sites across Europe reveal that peasant clothing was far more advanced than commonly portrayed. Preserved garments, textile fragments, and clothing accessories excavated from sites like the medieval village of Herjolfsens in Greenland and waterlogged deposits in London show sophisticated construction techniques specifically adapted for cold weather. These weren't haphazard coverings, but purposefully designed systems. The foundation of winter clothing was linen undergarments, not for modesty as commonly assumed, but as a critical moisture management layer. Microscopic analysis of preserved linen shirts from medieval contexts shows that these garments were typically made from finely processed flax fibers with excellent wicking properties. Modern textile testing has demonstrated that linen can absorb up to 20% of its weight in moisture before feeling wet against the skin, a crucial property in cold environments where sweat-dampened clothing can quickly lead to dangerous cooling. Over these base layers came wool, the miracle fiber of medieval winter survival. Archaeological textile fragments from peasant contexts show sophisticated wool processing techniques that maximize the fiber's insulating properties. Wool from medieval sheep breeds contained higher lanolin content than modern equivalents, providing natural water resistance. Crucial practical roles in winter survival networks. Beyond their spiritual functions, parish churches served as emergency warming centers during extreme conditions. Archaeological evidence from medieval churches across Northern Europe shows hearths and fuel storage areas not necessary for regular religious functions, but maintained for community emergency use. Church wardens' accounts from numerous parishes document winter fuel stockpiles specifically designated for this purpose, creating backup warming resources beyond individual household supplies. The sharing of specialized winter tools represents another dimension of community strategy. Manor inventories frequently list winter-specific implements, snow shovels, ice breakers for water access, specialized axes for frozen wood, as being maintained by the community rather than by individual households. This pooling of specialized resources maximizes their availability, while minimizing the material burden on individual families. An efficient allocation of limited resources. Even entertainment serves survival functions during the isolated winter months. Historical accounts describe storytelling gatherings, music and games that rotated between households throughout winter. Beyond their obvious morale benefits, these activities created occasions for multiple families to gather in single heated spaces, consolidating warmth and conserving fuel while strengthening the social bonds that underpinned mutual aid systems. What emerges from the historical and archaeological record is a picture of medieval winter not as a time of isolated household struggle, but as a season that activated sophisticated community support networks. These weren't merely cultural practices, but survival technologies, social systems as critical to winter survival as physical tools and techniques. The medieval peasants' greatest winter resource may have been neither their home nor their hearth, but the intricate web of community relationships that transformed individual vulnerability into collective resilience. As we draw our journey through the medieval winter to a close, we find ourselves not with images of primitive suffering, but with a profound appreciation for the sophisticated survival systems our ancestors developed. The medieval peasant, far from being a helpless victim of winter's fury, emerges as an environmental engineer, nutritional strategist, and community architect, developing solutions to cold weather challenges that modern science has often merely rediscovered rather than improved upon. The homes they built weren't crude shelters, but carefully designed environmental systems, using locally available materials to create insulation values that would remain competitive until the 20th century. Their hearths weren't simple fires, but complex heat management technologies, baking embers to stretch limited fuel through the longest nights. Their food preservation methods didn't merely prevent starvation, but maintained nutritional diversity through months when nothing grew, using biochemical principles that food science would only formally identify centuries later. Their clothing wasn't merely covering, but engineered protection, with layering systems and material choices that outdoor enthusiasts still employ today. Their integration of animals into winter living spaces wasn't primitive cohabitation, but a sophisticated interspecies alliance that benefited all participants. And perhaps most importantly, their community structures weren't just social arrangements, but survival networks that transformed individual vulnerability into collective resilience. What's most remarkable about these medieval winter survival strategies is their sustainability. Unlike our modern approaches that often rely on massive energy inputs and global supply chains, medieval solutions worked within local resource constraints while maintaining ecological balance. They didn't defeat winter through brute force technology, but through accumulated wisdom, careful observation, and intergenerational knowledge transfer. As our own society faces increasing energy constraints and climate uncertainties, perhaps there's wisdom to be recovered from these medieval approaches. Not to romanticize the hardships they endured, but to recognize the ingenuity with which they faced challenges similar to those we may encounter in different forms. Their focus on local resources, community resilience, and knowledge sharing offers models that remain relevant despite the centuries that separate us. The medieval peasants' winter story isn't one of primitive endurance, but of sophisticated adaptation, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of environmental challenges. As we retreat to our centrally heated homes and electronically mediated communities, we might pause to appreciate the winter wisdom of our ancestors who survived the coldest, darkest months, not through technological domination of nature, but through deeper understanding of its patterns and possibilities. In their smoke-filled homes, gathered around carefully tended hearths, medieval communities didn't just survive winter, they developed an intimate relationship with the season that modern convenience has largely erased from our experience. Perhaps in that relationship, built on respect for winter's power rather than insulation from its reality, lies wisdom worth reclaiming as we face our own uncertain climatic future.